be on the podcast. So I don't usually offer this, but since you're an editor, and B, since our conversation, I don't want to hold anything back. And since like our relationship transcends or blurs many boundaries between work and love and play and all sorts of interesting intersections of art and politics and sex, and I don't want you to, I don't think we should like restrain ourselves. I think we should give ourselves the option of deleting things that might come, we might decide later are TMI, as they say.
Okay, that's fine. That's good.
So that will just like allow us to have like a very free-flowing conversation.
Okay.
It's been a long time coming having you on the podcast. I know to your annoyance a little bit. Actually, you've been on the podcast because the last one from Bombay Beach, but a proper conversation we haven't had yet. And I've been waiting for the moment because I think that our relationship has been a really unusual like kind of journey for me. And usually I have like fallen in love very quickly, and it's been like kind of an immediate. And this kind of metaphor of falling is interesting because you just kind of finally you stumble into something, and our journey has been like a slow, very careful, deliberate walk into love, I think.
It's like the most unsexy thing I've ever heard.
No, it's not at all. Wait, let me finish what I thought.
I'm kidding.
Because there's usually this kind of lack of any sort of agency or awareness of what's happening, and for me like but there's this idea of like going deep into something, right? When you say you fall into something, right? Whereas I feel like we over 2 years have like slowly kind of gone into this even deeper place, and it's been the most magnificent journey, partly because I think there's like a aspect of your personality and your being which I kind of want to uncover in this conversation a little bit, of this kind of layered nature of Dulcinee, and that, you know, what the Dulcinee that is first presented to people is only one layer, and you know there's this idea of an onion that you keep peeling away layer after layer, but then I think that metaphor goes to like then there's nothing in the end. Whereas I find that with you, I'm peeling away layer after layer and finding all this like amazing substance, and now we found ourselves in a place of like not only being friends and lovers and creative collaborators and kind of life project collaborators with Bombay Beach, because I think of Bombay Beach as a kind of also kind of accidentally life-defining project. And so the reason I've been like I've waited to have you on the podcast is I've kind of like I feel like we've spent the last 2 years kind of finding a plateau of sorts in this deep place of.
What do you mean plateau?
In the sense of like we're still on a journey, but I feel like we finally kind of have settled into this complex dynamic that incorporates all of these things. Like I said, like it's work and play and mutual like admiration and respect, and also kind of desire to, I think, like improve in every way that I don't know, I just feel like we bring out really good things in each other.
Yeah.
At least I know you do in me. So anyway, all by way of introduction, this is Dulcinee. Say hello.
Hello, walk walking into love. Yeah.
I don't think it's unsexy.
No, I don't think it's unsexy. I think
On the
it's
contrary.
I think it's like a very mature way to enter into love.
Bring the mic closer to your mouth.
Really?
Yes, like bring it towards you like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Very
Like
nice.
this?
You can, people can feel like you're whispering into their ear.
I know.
It's
I do
nice.
feel like you're whispering into my ear.
Yeah, it's nice.
It's nice. Okay. Yeah, I think it's a good. I think when we fall into love too quickly, it usually doesn't end well. Which isn't to say that's always true, but I think that you don't really know someone when you first meet them. And so when you walk into love, you have the opportunity to actually know who they are, or at least scratch the surface.
Maybe swimming is sexier. Or like dive,
Maybe
like kind of
waltzing or something.
Dancing.
I think you're right that falling implies a lack of control, yeah, and like a lack of awareness. Like you've tripped over the edge and you're falling.
Yeah.
Whereas cascading, I don't know.
But I kind of want to talk about, because, okay, so for those of you who don't know about Dulcinee, you're a very ambitious, hardworking, determined, kind of, we share a kind of love of many things, but you've managed to somehow like dive into many things and not be superficial in any of them because of your incredible work ethic, which I admire and envy slightly. But so you have this kind of incredible drive. What do you think that comes from, and what are you driving towards?
I mean, I think it comes from a deep sort of manic desire to feel like I have done something before I die. It's like a little bit morbid in that sense. I like want to leave something behind that isn't just children, whether it's a film or a book or something. I don't know. I just want something to keep the world company when I've passed, and it feels like a really hard thing to actually accomplish, is to leave a mark. And so I don't know exactly what medium that's going to be. Obviously, film has been my focus, but
as a director and an editor and a writer, your work ostensibly is as an editor. It's interesting you made this reference of like not just children, right? So there's this really interesting. I mean, I want to go deep into this, like gender, feminism. In it like film has been such a like male dominated medium, except for editing, right? Like editing has since the beginning has been like it's been the door has been open to women, and it's kind of points to the backwardness of it, because editing is like the most important and the most underappreciated of all the art forms. And then there's this kind of primordial idea of like the man going out and shooting literally, and then bringing back the stuff for the woman to cook.
Well, yeah, and the women are like hidden away and
working
like
there,
dark
slaving
rooms,
away, and not given any credit. Like most people walking down the street don't know what the editor does.
100%. Yeah, it's where the movie's made.
Exactly.
And I think a lot of editors do the work for bad directors, and will like sort of step into that leadership role, but never get the credit. Which is why I think editors tend to make good directors. But yeah, it has been a very gendered role, I think in part because it is behind the scenes and there isn't a lot of understanding. I mean, unless you've sat in an edit for a period of time, you can't possibly understand actually happens, and how the story is made in that point.
And how did you get into editing?
I studied film in undergrad, and I was in a class, and I had to make a film with my friend, and it was like the first time I ever tried to make a movie, and she like left. We had like a dramatic, I don't remember the details, but she left, and I needed to finish the film for our final, and I just did it, and I grabbed a lot of my favorite songs and wound up making more of a music video than a film. But I found I really liked it. And I'm like a pretty big computer nerd. That's something people don't know about me. But I grew up playing computer games, and I've always been, I say that one of my skills is I have an immense ability to just sit at a computer for a very long period of time without moving. Like, people will walk by me and be like, "You're still here." And so that translates into being able to really sit and watch the same thing over and over again until it clicks, and sometimes it's better than sex. Like, when you find the rhythm and you find the flow of an edit, it's like, it's so pleasing.
Yeah. I mean, all work, creative work specifically, I think this kind of flow and communion with your medium and with the world and the feeling of making something, it is the peak kind of human experience, I think.
Yeah, and in astrology, dare I bring it into the conversation? In astrology, creative work, creativity, and sex are in the same house. So I do think it's there's a similar expression there. But I will say, I don't think in film flow is found very often. Like, I think maybe on sets of a certain scale, but with music, we associate music with flow, right? Like, it's really easy to find that sort of ethereal, divine state. With film, like in production, I've never experienced flow. I think because maybe I'm just at a scale where everything is chaos all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you experience moments where like the take is really good or the camera was perfect. But in the edit, especially if I'm alone and I don't have someone looking over my shoulder, which is actually how I prefer to edit, I can find a flow and a rhythm that I think is quite akin to improvisation with music, like what you do on the piano. And so that's been a really important part of my process.
And astrology.
We don't have to get into it.
No,
Tao hates astrology. I'm looking right at the camera. Tao hates
don't
astrology,
hate astrology.
but he's getting more into it.
No. Look, you have to admit there's definitely... Okay, look. I'm a romantic. I'm a...
Are you a
dreamer. I'm a kind of, I embrace contradiction and surrealism.
What do you
like
mean?
I'm not like, but I do have this kind of like rationalist in the most basic sense of like causation, right? And we know that there were times when we didn't understand causes and effects, and we didn't know much about the physical universe, the laws of physics, the kind of ways that kind of things can and cannot have effect on each other, and nor did we know anything about what was going on in the heavens. Like, so we would name constellations for what they look like to us, which of course now with telescopes and stuff we know that the stars they're not even in the same place if they look to us like a scorpion or this or that. They don't really have any relationship beyond a very superficial one and like they kind of the astrological understanding is rooted in a total misunderstanding of what's going on in the world physically. So I am curious about these archetypes and these stories, and I do find that there's deep. My father was very into astrology. He was also very superstitious, and there was a lot of kind of irrational kind of interpretation of events, and yet there is truth. There's truth in mythological tales. There's truth in explanations of let's say religious kind of stories that are deep because they kind of contain something about our culture and our history and everything like that. So I'm open to it in that regard, but you have to admit that there's a lot of real nonsense that's said around this.
Sure.
Based in nonsense. It perpetuates nonsense. It perpetuates a lack of
perpetuate nonsense. Astrology is not the only thing that is in danger of perpetuating nonsense. And I think that regardless of whether or not the constellations actually look like scorpions, and that's like a sort of an observation of an objective truth. I think the reality is it doesn't need to be objective. It doesn't need to be truth to have meaning and to play a force in our lives. And everything is constructed. I mean, our whole understanding of the world is constructed, and astrology is just one expression of that. And I think that whenever I talk about astrology, especially with a skeptic, I always say something that I'm like, oh, but it's all bullshit anyways. Because it's healthy to have a skepticism and a sort of I don't believe in anything 100%, right. Including science, right? We live in a time where maybe we can say some laws of physics are, true, but science as an industry, as the way it's used to advance certain perspectives and advance certain ideologies is absolutely not rational. And anyone who says that it is wrong and naive and stupid. And that's what postmodernism gave us, right? Is that legitimacy is a thing constructed by institutions to uphold their power.
Yeah.
And so, we can talk about astrology being bullshit, but we can also talk about, everything else being bullshit too.
Right. And so do you think that there's stories that we tell that are useful? Is that how you would look at it in a way that's when on the other side, the obverse of the bullshit side?
Think that,
where's the truth come from?
What truth?
The truth that does exist in these astrological kind of I think archetypes, or is it founded in stories? Is it founded in actual kind of dynamics between us and the stars, or
I mean, I think I think there's a lot of mystery in the world. That's a narrative I've told myself to make the world a little bit more interesting. One of my favorite quotes is, "What is it about reality that is so overbearing?" And I find a rational explanation of reality quite boring. And so I like to sort of buy into the fact that there's mystery and that we don't know everything about the universe, because we don't. And many scientists would agree with me, right?
Yeah, of course.
Theoretical physicists will say, yeah, we don't know shit.
Right.
And the things that we think we know now in 100 years might be refuted.
Yeah.
And so we live on very unstable ground. And so I choose to believe that there's a lot of mystery and that things like intuition are real. You can't define, what the laws of physics are behind intuition, but we all know that intuition to a certain degree is something we experience. And so,
So is astrology like an intuition held by the culture at large? Or
maybe. That's a cool way of saying it. I mean, I do think it speaks to the cultural subconscious.
Yeah. I like that. That's my favorite explanation.
Yeah.
That's the only one I can get behind that I've heard.
And I think it's a tool to communicate. It's a tool. Yeah. It's not a truth. It's not a religion, though some people do treat it as a religion. But I think that one of the best explanations for tarot is that it's a tool to talk to yourself.
Right.
And so, you have therapy, which is basically a form of talking to yourself. And maybe if you can't afford therapy, or you want to be a little bit more mysterious about it, you can use tarot, which is not maybe some people are like, the universe is giving me this message right now, and this is direct from the source. Or you can sort of understand that these are just mechanisms and tools to maybe add a little joy and add a little mystery to your life while also being self-reflective.
Yeah, I guess I get off the boat when it's the opposite of embracing mystery, that it pretends to explain things that don't have an explanation.
Right.
And it's looking for patterns that maybe aren't there, and it just feels like it's just like a superficial kind of, the opposite of mystery. It's like saying, I know this, it's because this, you know, and it's like, no, you don't. It's like, that's silly. Like to say like, oh, this is because you're a Scorpio or something. It's just like,
again, I think it's like, I think that the resurgence of astrology and these sort of like mystical new age tools over the last, I don't know, like 5 to 10 years, at least that's like when it's come into my world in terms of my friend group and being really present online and on social media. Like, I think it's important to remember that people need meaning and they need faith. And we live in a time where organized religion is not something that many young people are part of. And so I'll speak specifically to young people that, like, I've watched so many people grasp onto these tools and techniques because it gives them meaning in a world that feels like it's crumbling. And like, you can't, it's like you can tell them and they're being irrational, but why are you taking away something that's making them feel better? That's really what it comes down to me. It's like, are you going to scream at a child that their make-believe games aren't true? Why? That's just rude. Like, why don't you take a step back? And maybe it doesn't, I'm not talking about you specifically, but when people really get like incensed about, like, you know, pointing out that astrology is stupid and fake, I'm like, take a step back and just understand that maybe this person needs this to feel okay, to feel hope, to feel faith, to feel like they understand the world. And maybe you don't need it, but you don't need to take it away from them. And that, to me, is a more evolved understanding of why people are grasping onto these tools that might seem irrational, but that I think...
I mean, that's the same can be said about religion.
Absolutely. But astrology is not like the Catholic Church. You know, there's no like organized like system of exploitation with astrology. Like, you have people online tweeting things, you know? Nobody is exploiting, to my knowledge, there's no underground network of like evil astrologers stealing.
Pedophile astrologers.
I mean, look, maybe I'm just haven't done my research, but I mean, tarot is just, it's like playing cards, right? Like, again, there's no like a lord of the tarot who's saying you must do this and you can't do that and you must confess your sins to me. Like, I think that you're right that religion does serve that purpose, but it's these tools we're talking about are largely deinstitutionalized and accessible to anyone. You can just, you know, go online and learn about it, buy a book, start doing tarot. You can do it for, I don't know, $40.
I should get a tarot sponsor.
Gross. I mean, most people are using the same deck. I mean, people make their own decks, but the same deck that was made, I don't know, in the early 1900s. The Rider-Waite deck, I mean, it's incredible.
Okay.
Enough of that.
Let's talk
Let's
about
move on.
Things. What do you want to talk about? What's been on your mind?
What's been on my mind?
Yes.
Well, let's see. I guess it's funny that you mentioned at the beginning, and since we're doing we're not holding back, you mentioned at the beginning it's been a long time in the making of me coming on the podcast, and I sort of giggled at that. It's from my perspective, it's been a long time in the making for you to realize that I'm perhaps worthy to be on your podcast. And so I'd love to hear you talk about that journey and why you think now and not in the past 2 years that you've known me. Why now? Why extend this invitation?
Oh my God. Okay, this is like a not so thinly veiled you're basically saying I've been too dense to realize your brilliance for 2 years.
No.
And that's why it's taken me so long to like both fall in love and realize that you're worthy of being on the podcast. That's not the case. To be honest, it's like, it's the opposite.
You're paraphrasing, but but I hear you. Wow, let's get into it. I like it.
Yeah, no, I'm so I think I'm actually more patient than you, which is something I can't say about many people, because I'm not a very patient person. But with you, I have taken this patient role.
That's true.
And I think that because I haven't been in any hurry with you, I've had a deep sense that our journey was going to be long. And so, and it was kind of an intuition more than based in any sort of knowledge of the future, which I don't have, the same what nobody else has. But I had a sense when we met, and this goes to what we were talking about earlier, that there's no hurry, and that I'm just gonna kind of let things unfold in a very organic way. And this took the form of, you know, both of us being in relationships when we met, and then we can get into polyamory and openness and all of this, which I think is like obviously something that, again, I find that it's we could have like just recklessly done things in a way that would not have laid the foundation that we have, and we could have had a superficial conversation when we met about a lot of things that I don't think we understood yet about each other and about the way we relate to each other. And again, I think we're still early in the journey. I think that there's years to, and we're going to look back on this one day and say like, oh, look how young and naive we were. And yet I knew we were going to have this conversation. I've known it for years, and you weren't privy to my inner workings, both emotionally and in terms of all of the journeys we've been on. And again, like I think we can like talk about each of these things individually, but like the way that we're navigating mixing in a way that if you don't do it carefully can wreak a lot of havoc in both our own and other people's lives, mixing polyamory and kink and work and creativity and friendship with each other and with other people, and also kind of I think a nascent political awareness that we both have spent our lives thinking about, and then like the opportunity to implement some of these like ideas in something real and delicate and deeply complicated project like Bombay Beach. So I think that this is just like the first time we're documenting a conversation. We're having a conversation for the last 2 years about all these things. But I do think it's taken until now not to like recognize that your worthiness. Like that's not what's happened. What's happened is like, again, it's been a slow, deliberate walk deeper into each of these like facets of the way we relate to each other and to the world. And I think the conversation now is more interesting and has more possibility of going deeper and I think it lays the foundation to have many more and to interview people together and like to like do all of these things. So that's my answer. I rest my case.
I think it's a good answer. I think perhaps, well, I mean, you saying I didn't have access to the inner workings of your mind or your understanding of a sort of trajectory that you implicitly understood. I think that's interesting. That's an interesting, honest self-reflection. Because it did take a long time, I think, for me to feel like I had access to you, emotionally speaking. And I wonder, like, why do you think that is or was? Like, do you...
It's interesting. Someone that we know recently said to me that they don't understand what is going on emotionally with me, and it's made it difficult for them to like know and trust me, I guess. And it's interesting because on one hand, I'm very I wear my heart on my sleeve in some ways, like even in having conversations like this, you know, in this strangely public way, or making films that have gone deep into my personal issues, or used personal issues to explore difficult, you know, the things that I've been made to go through, whether it's like, you know, very hardcore drug addiction in my family, or, you know, you know, using kind of like my experience of divorce and the heartbreak to like spend 4 years exploring monogamy, you know, what became the film Monogamish. Like that movie took like 5 years to make because it took me that long to dive deep enough to make something that was deeply vulnerable and meaningful, which I think in the end it became. And people have like, but for the first many iterations, it was easy to fall back on a kind of intellectual approach, let's say, of like, oh, let's look at the history of marriage, and let's look at the legal implications and the philosophical, and everyone. And I remember my mother would say like, Tao, you can't make a film about relationships and have it be so cold, right? And again, I'm gonna make the same explanation as I did about us, that I think that to explore deep takes time. It doesn't like it's literally not possible to just have one conversation and say, this is how I feel. Like I don't, it's much more, it's just, it takes years to like open up. Maybe this is a fault of mine. Maybe it's like, maybe I have too many barriers, but I think it's literally too, and then you've taught me about meditation, which I want to talk about also. Yeah, as a quick aside, I was trying to get Dulcinee to quit smoking out of care for her health.
Also, like, because it's hard for you to not smoke if someone around you is smoking.
This is true too. So care for my own health too. Yeah. Care for health, let's say. So I tried various things like rational argument. And bribery, which
didn't work.
None of these things worked. And then one day Dulcinee called me and says like, I figured out what you can do to make me quit smoking. And I was like, oh my God, what? And she said, train in transcendental meditation and like start practicing it. Now, if you know me, there is nothing that sounded more daunting or difficult in the world than sitting for 20 minutes still twice a day. Like literally you could tell me like, I want you to run 10 miles as fast as you can every day. And that would have seemed easier to me. Like, I have such a kind of agitated mind that thought was like, I thought this is so much harder than quitting smoking, but I want to do it. I want to do it because I want you to quit smoking, and B, I really want to see if I can do this. And usually if I'm forced to do something, it's actually good. Like I've always worked well with deadlines and structures. Like school, I was a good student and was able to always do all my homework, because when I have something that I have to do, I'll do it, you know, whereas if I don't, my natural state is to kind of be a little, you know, unstructured and lazy. So I was like very grateful for this challenge, and now I'm trying to remember why we got into this. Something about sitting still. Go ahead.
I just don't want to actually close out what you were saying before you started talking about meditation.
Yeah.
Because in a way, it feels like a bit of a deflection.
What, talking about meditation?
Yeah.
Okay, so what were we talking about?
We were talking about like vulnerability and like the sharing of your internal life, and you said like maybe it's a fault of mine, and I don't think it's a fault, and I don't think that I'm just curious about your own reflections on whether or not you are aware of when you're letting someone into your internal life and how often that happens, because I think there's a difference between sharing, like making raw work, making work that is connected to something that is vulnerable and emotional, but in a sense that when you do it in an artwork, there is like a distance between you and the thing, which is almost like a safety barrier, versus like just being vulnerable with someone and letting them into your internal life, or letting them have access to what you're thinking about, really what you're thinking about, not a performance of something else.
But that's why I brought up the meditation. Is I do think that you've helped me on this. Like, I think that that's been a necessary part of my journey.
The meditation.
Yeah, and a kind of like sitting for a moment and just allowing myself to think and feel whatever it is I'm thinking and feeling. I do have this kind of like tendency to be hyperactive, and that is probably a form of like ignoring things that might be going on. So I guess what I want to say is, though, like I don't feel like I'm not letting other people in any more than I'm not letting myself in. Like, I think that I would say...
Beautifully said. Oh God, beautifully said.
So as I discover things, I'm
that feels very true.
People are welcome. At least, not everyone, obviously. Like, I do think that there's a certain like dignity to having, just like
and boundaries.
Boundaries. There's dignity and boundaries, and I'm all for pushing boundaries. Like my whole life is based on pushing boundaries, but pushing them in a deliberate way, and in a way that's thoughtful and sensitive, hopefully, and not just like let's just like unload everything on everyone.
Yeah.
Let's push the boundaries in a way that we're like carefully repositioning them in a way that's progressive, deeply progressive, let's say.
I do think you're very thoughtful in those engagements and those explorations, more so than other people.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think that if anything, like the last few weeks has even taught me is like, the acknowledgement of our feelings and of our insecurities and our doubts and our primitive kind of, how do we face our more primitive instincts in a way that's constructive. And that's why, like, we hinted at the kind of like gender issues of like, I kind of want to like dive into the idea of like the way we've kind of reinterpreted these like masculine and feminine roles in a way that both is like ritualized and acknowledging of their contingencies and absurdities through kink. So she smiles and rubs my leg with her. That's something that obviously I've been wanting to talk about in this conversation. Do you want to open the door?
Kick us off. Yeah, let's see, where to begin. I mean, my experience with kink is largely, entirely thanks to you. You sort of invited me into this world in an explicit way. And so in that sense, I feel quite new to it. It's not like I've been swimming in these murky waters for a very long time. But, I think my I'm friends with so many people who are gender fluid and non-binary and trans, and have been since I was in college. And so I've always been in a very like queer, gender bendy friend group. And yet, despite that proximity, I've always been this almost like hyper feminine person, woman who sort of enjoys the traditional markers of femininity, whether that's cooking or taking care of the home or wearing heels and very feminine clothing. Like that is undeniably part of me and has been ever since I can remember. And so it's always been this weird, I've never gotten to investigate that so deeply as through my kink relationship with you, which is very gendered. And that's almost kind of like the point, is that it's playing on these gender roles in a traditional sense, but because you're opting into it and you're very specific about the ways that you engage with it, it feels like you have more agency. And it also feels like an experiment, weirdly. It's a game of theater. It's an experiment. It's so many things.
I love the way it confronts you with these contradictions in your ideals and in your desires. And so lucky that I am attracted to very powerful women, right? Like I have zero interest in being with a submissive woman in the world, right? Like I have like, I definitely am grateful to my mother for being like super independent and adventurous and
badass.
Bold, and like, you know, left home when she was 15 to go travel around and lived in a cave with a monkey in Morocco for a month when her boyfriend was arrested in Fez, and she had to, as a 16-year-old girl, was like going to the prison every day and bringing him pies and then
Epic.
moving to Italy and like, you know, starting this whole life with like, I mean, it's just countless adventures, and kind of always showed me the way of like questioning authority, questioning hierarchies. And I think Freud, you know, for all of his problems, had some deeply true insights that, you know, we're attracted to this example that was kind of set for us in a way, right? And so I've just always been attracted to very kind of bold, assertive, ambitious, intelligent, just badass women, right? And you know, there's the cliche of the CEO who's kind of an asshole, or just deeply is an asshole, and then he wants to be like degraded and ashamed and like, you know, dominated in the bedroom, and like in the outer world he's just like a psychopath, and then he like has this, and I've like thought often half jokingly that I'm the opposite of that. Like I'm actually a very soft and kind and compassionate person.
Yeah.
And I'm attracted to people who are super like independent and assertive and don't fit in any of these like traditionally gendered roles. And yet when we enter the bedroom, this reversal happens. And I don't know if it's a beautiful kind of sublimation of these like primitive instincts that then get to like take shape in this ritualized, conscious, you know, almost embodied and kind of ironic, but also really not ironic at all, and playful and yet not playful at all. And we get to kind of explore these nether regions of our kind of, like you said, like very traditionally gendered like dynamics, and unlike, you know, the opposite of the CEO who's got a bunch of people you know, working for him and is dominant in real life, I find myself completely not in control in real life. I find myself like life is kind of this amazing kind of wild thing that happens to me. And then like I find that like it's strangely like thrilling, not strangely, like it is thrilling to kind of like make this ritual container in which, like, you know, you dominate and control this person, that spirit that is so obviously indomitable. And that I love for that very reason, you know. So I guess that's I mean, again, just thinking out loud, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been so cathartic, I think, for it feels like some form of embodied therapy, or it's like it has elements of therapy where I think you're able to kind of zoom out and look at yourself and the inner workings of your mind and your consciousness, and the way that society has conditioned us. You're able to kind of zoom out and see those mechanisms and start to tinker with them by enacting them consciously. Because, you know, when you're like a teenager, like a teenage girl, you're not consciously acting out gendered roles, like me putting on makeup when I was very young, or, you know, going to prom and dressing in this very traditional way, like that. None of that was conscious. I was following a script, a social script that was not my own and that I didn't really consent to, other than just being born and like growing up, you know, in the world. But that this arena, the kink space and the DS space specifically, or at least the way that we're engaging with it, is this like hyper aware, hyper intentional putting on of this role that is both enjoyable because I enjoy it, right? Like there's, when I say I like to cook and I like to wear heels and whatever, I don't feel that that is like being forced upon me.
Right.
I really enjoy wearing heels. Like, you'll never see me not in heels. That's like a part of who I am. And I do gain genuine satisfaction from that. So I'm enjoying the role genuinely. And then I'm also able to have this sort of, it's almost like it's like an exorcism or something. Like it's able to play out the thing that I didn't consent to, but consenting to that playing out of it, which feels really cathartic.
Yeah.
Like it's like a wash, and I feel every engagement in the kink space with you is not just like, oh, you know, that was fun, great sex, whatever, that there's growth and there's self-reflection, and like I'm learning about myself. Some of it's a little scary, but I'm able to see it, right? I'm able to talk about it. Like, maybe I'm talking to myself in my journal, but like I'm able to put words to things that I've never really had the opportunity to think about in this way. And so
I mean, so let's talk, let's take a step out a second, because like I consider myself, you know, a feminist through and through. I think that this is only interesting on the backdrop of that. Again, I'd have no interest in like exploring these roles if we were living in a more, you know, a more boundary defined culture in which that was like already there.
Right.
You know, like I would have, I'm sure if we were in like a, I don't know. I mean, there's countless examples of like there, and we still have so long to go. So my question is, what
we still live under patriarchy?
Of course. So what is feminism to you?
Oh God.
What And how does both polyamory and kink fit into that kind of philosophical and political worldview for you? And this is a place that I want to learn.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I love about our relationship is like, I feel like we're constantly learning from each other.
Yeah.
And to kind of just, you know, ask you straight up, like, what are your kind of political goals and the broader scale? And
with kink?
No. What is kind of, if you could just kind of just riff for a little while about what one's responsibilities, both as a man and a woman who are like allies of feminism,
right,
in the outside world as activists, and then how does this that we're talking about in the personal level relate to that? You know, I know it's a huge question, but it's just like, I'm just opening a
massive astronomical questions, but I think they're great. What is I mean, I am a feminist.
What does it mean? Is there a succinct definition of feminism that you can like?
I'll say that I'll define myself as a Marxist before I define myself as a feminist, and that's like an important distinction to me. I think that, you know, some strains of feminism and the times that we live in are a little performative, and don't, it's like, I'm nervous saying this in a public arena, but I'll commit to it.
It's interesting. You haven't been nervous already, and this makes you more nervous.
Well, just because I do something that my friends who are very political and very specific in the way that they use language when talking about what some might deem to be sensitive topics is that I want to be specific about the language that I'm using to answer a question like, what does feminism mean to you? Especially if my answer is a little bit more nuanced and complicated than just I am a feminist and like, let's fight for the matriarchy.
Right.
Which, you know, I don't disagree with those statements. I just I define myself as a Marxist first, and feminism can be part of that. I mean, it's also like feminism, while also being in close proximity to so many gender fluid people and non-binary people, is I am also trying to always move to a non-gendered, breaking the binary sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yes, like the acknowledgement of we still live in patriarchy and under patriarchy, and the sexes are not equal, is an important thing to acknowledge. I think for me personally, I feel a responsibility to talk to the, you know, cis straight men in my life always, and to the best of my ability point out the times, the moments where I think that their identity is clouding their ability to be an ally. And this is a really delicate and at times tense practice that I've engaged with all the men in my life, not just the people I'm dating, but my stepdad, my godfather, my grandpa. Like, it's not just my lovers. And so, you know, that feels like, in a very small personal way, the ways in which feminism moves through me, is that, like, when I think a man is being a little bit too much of a man, I'll try and talk to them about it. And I'm not always perfect in that. And I think that I'm balancing always anger. Like, I think this is a conversation that makes a lot of women angry. And rightly so, but men sometimes don't want to receive that anger. And they make it about themselves instead of understanding that there's also just an anger at the world. Like, the amount of misogyny I've experienced in the film industry is just like astronomical.
Right.
And that makes me angry. And so sometimes if I'm talking to a man about something that doesn't have to do with the misogyny that I've experienced, but somehow it's all conflating, and like this person in front of me is becoming a symbol of all men, and I'm fucking pissed.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll rationalize that and be like, well, you need to just take this right now. And it upsets me when all of a sudden they're being like, well, if you would just change your tone, it'd be easier to listen to you. That's respectability politics, right? Like, that's saying I need to adjust my tone because it's making you uncomfortable, when like I walk through life being deeply uncomfortable all the time. You can, right now it's happening. But I always listen, and try. I do want to get through to people. Like, my political goal is to make people think differently, and to sort of wedge myself under the assumptions that they're making, which of course is all just based on my own worldview, which is biased. But I like my worldview, and it's constructed intentionally. Thank you. It's been constructed very intentionally. Yeah, I think you are too.
But yeah, it's a process.
Totally. It's a lifelong process, and then just
everything's a process.
Yes. Changing the minds of all men everywhere is a process. But just to answer your last question about what is kink and polyamory, how does that fit into it? I think that if more people knew about the ways in which kink can be embodied therapy, and specifically related to gender roles, like I don't know, I'd be curious how many more people would be interested in it beyond. I think there's an understanding that it just means good sex, or weird sex, and it's about pleasure. And I think that I'm excited to talk to people about the ways in which it's deeply political and like deeply philosophical, and can provide a space for catharsis, which I think, people deep in the kink space know, but I think that people outside of it, and specifically women, like, I'd love to, advocate for that. And then for polyamory, I mean, yeah, it's a little bit more obvious.
I was just going to say obvious. Yeah, clearly.
Yeah.
No, and I have Italian friends who are like so like just on board philosophically and politically, and yet the deep-seated cultural like expectations and sense of like ownership and of control, and of make it literally impossible for them to accept the idea of their woman having multiple lovers,
Totally.
And so like I gotta change my position because my back hurts.
Do you want a pillow?
No, it's okay. I just have to think if I sit cross-legged like this, I'm better.
Okay.
But so to me, like, I love that journey of and again, it's this dance of like control. I had a lover once who had the word control in a like New York Times font, big, like 6-inch letters, like along her side, and I was like, whoa, and what's this? And she's like, well, it's all about control,
right.
and the way we play with control, both of our because we have these sometimes literally uncontrollable desires and impulses and instincts, and then we have our our ideas and our ideals and our politics and our sensitivities and our big picture goals and ways that we shape our lives and our relationships. And to me, the more consciously we can and brutally honestly we can like address those impulses and those desires and those turn-ons and then try and reconcile them with our politics and our big picture like ambitions with ourselves and the world. The more we face those with a kind of brutal honesty, the deeper we can go, and the more like you keep using this word catharsis, which I think is right. I think that we can like kind of push through acknowledge, and therapy is a great analog here, because the whole idea of therapy is to like uncover something, and by virtue of that uncovering, you're helping to heal it, right?
Exactly.
That's the big presupposition of therapy, right? And I do think that this is literally that, right? Totally. And in the polyamory space, like there's these larger ideals of saying we should be free, we should be women should be able to act out the fact that they have as much desire for variety, as much desire for newness, as much desire to express even the most superficial sexual impulses, that there's no shame in that. Like we're breaking out of these like millennia of shaming women for any sort of expression of desire. And like there was a historian of sex and the law that I interviewed for Monogamish, and he said there was like the entire history of like the law and sex has been based on men's desire to like control women's sexuality. And it was done for centuries by saying women are completely out of control sexual creatures, and so they need to be like boxed in for that reason. And then there was a switch in like Victorian times to say that actually women don't have sexual desires, and if they do, there's something wrong with them. But in both these situations, it's like a fear that men have of this beautiful, amazing, like powerful force that and they've tried to put it in a box in a way, or we, let's say, not they, have tried to kind of put it in this box very unsuccessfly, right? And the neuroses that come out on both sides at the end of that are just horrible, and like ripple out into like institutions and power dynamics and all of these things.
Absolutely.
So I guess my hope is that we can kind of explore these things in a way that's super communicated, super consensual, super full of agency and deep conversation. And this is part of that, obviously. And then somehow that you get the reward, which is this like amazing deep enjoyment.
Well, it's
right?
It's pleasure, it's intimacy, it's self-reflection. It's like so much more than just like a good fuck, right? Which I think is important to say aloud. And maybe it's coming from my understanding of kink a few years ago was like not very nuanced. I was like, oh, people like to like do these things,
more performative maybe.
Performative. And
do you want to talk about performativity in general, because that's an issue that women have to kind of face all the time, and that lovers we're constantly kind of negotiating this, what we're actually feeling with what we're like portraying that we're feeling. So how does that play out for you sexually?
I mean, I think most of the sex in my life has been performative.
Hold on. The screen went off. I want to make sure it's still recording.
Okay.
Hold that thought.
I'll hold it. Did your computer die?
No.
Interlude. Do 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 do. Okay, I'm so good.
Cut.
Oh my God.
We'll
That's
talk
what
about
she
this
said.
Okay, most of the sex you've had in your life has been performative, you said.
Most of the sex in my life has been performative.
That's
Which
probably
is,
true of most women.
I think, true of, and might be true of men too. I don't know. I just like, it's easier for a guy to come. So, you know, there might be a lack of acknowledgement that, you know, the sex even for the man is performative too. But, you know, when you spend a majority of your life faking orgasms, you think more about why the sex you're having is bad. And I mean, it's interesting to think about kink, because kink is in a way performative. It's just like it comes back to like this intentionality behind it, that like you are able to willingly and knowingly be like, I'm gonna put this role on right now. And I think that our dynamic is less theatrical than I think most kink. Like, I think, you know, kink is often like, the scene has begun, blah. Right. Whereas for us, it's like much more fluid and seeps into our relationship in a way that I find really interesting, because I don't, the sort of like the kink like in a box over there isn't as interesting to me. Same. Yeah. I think that the blurring of our relationship and our kink dynamic makes it really exciting and really wonderful. But yeah, I guess like I'm happy to be, maybe it's like my partner is we're both stepping into something together, a performance that is both really primal and very organic, and also knowingly performative. And that because we're doing that together with a deep awareness of the contours of the game that we're playing, that makes it like, for me, feel like revolutionary. I'm just like, right. Whoa, like that sex can be like this, and not this this thing where I'm performing, but I'm not saying that I'm performing, because part of the performance is pretending like it's not a performance, right, versus the acknowledgement that it's a performance, and the sort of freedom and agency that comes with that acknowledgement.
Now, what do you think about, we've talked about it as a counterpoint to these political ideals. What do you think if anything, what does it say about those primitive instincts that give rise to these desires? Do you think they're like built in, so to speak?
That they're innate?
Or are they just like fully culturally, are we addressing things that feel like deep instincts but are actually just social constructs? Or do you think there's some like innate primordial like drives that we're addressing, or that we're witnessing, let's say, and participating in?
I think we'll never know, and it most certainly has to be a combination of both. I mean, I don't think it's surprising that, you know, I lost my dad at a very young age. And, you know, everyone has daddy issues, regardless of whether they're, you know, dad's passed away.
Including us boys.
Right, including, and that was actually one of the first things you and I talked about in the pool the day that we met, was daddy issues, because you just recorded a podcast about daddy issues. And I remember us sort of like bonding about our shared daddy issues. And that's maybe like a topic for a whole other conversation.
No. Keep going.
Or today. But
let's leave no stone unturned.
I just like, I think that most certainly the literal things that happen to us in childhood, we are just always working through for the rest of our lives. You're right that adulthood is trying to take care of that child who is traumatized, and not only traumatized in a personal, familial way, but also by society. Like, there are so many moments I can recall, sort of iconic moments of my youth where my gender was like, branded into me, by society. These sort of moments of like hyper sexualization, very specifically in high school. I went to a boarding school that just at the time was, I mean, maybe it's still like this, but just such a gendered space. Like, and just, so those things were also, that's trauma. That's societal trauma. And then there's like the literal trauma, the personal trauma of like losing my dad at a young age. And so where does the innate nature of like, I don't know, when I was born, was I pristine, tabula rasa, and then all of this trauma happened to me and now I'm kinky? Like, I don't know. I tend to think that humans are, fucked up creatures, but we are born into a fucked up world. And so I can't say, I don't know if we're born out of the womb pristine or if we just get, conditioned, but it doesn't matter. What matters is the acknowledgement that we have these neuroses, these pathologies inside of us, and maybe kink isn't the way for everyone to explore that, but also maybe therapy isn't the way that everyone needs to explore it. Like, I've had terrible experiences with talk therapy, and some people are like, oh, you just haven't found the right therapist. I'm like, yeah, maybe. Maybe right now I'm just using a different tool to investigate the inner workings of my mind.
It's funny, we haven't talked about this, but I'm very much on the same page about that.
About talk therapy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the same way I feel. It's the same skepticism I feel about like people who call themselves shamans now. Seriously.
No, totally. I'm just remembering our encounter with a shaman recently. Let's not. I don't want to talk about that.
No. Let's just say the world is full of charlatans in every domain.
Yeah, and I think that, I can also have the perspective that everyone should go to therapy, because I just think like, we have a lot going on in our heads, and so any sort of opportunity to unravel that
I mean, this is talk therapy right now.
This is talk therapy, totally, and journaling is talk therapy.
Yeah.
It's maybe more effective than talk therapy, but I don't want to discount that a lot of people like really need therapy, if only for a specific point in their life.
I've been to a therapist twice, and I was so lucky because I was really suffering after my divorce, and I was just like trying to figure out, and then my little brother said, oh, I've got a therapist for you. And as soon as I walked in, I was like, oh my God, this is such a blessing. Like, they literally know everything about my childhood already. He'd been talking to her for years, right?
Interesting.
So it was like I walked into like a pre-baked fucking like therapy session that had years and years of like deep analysis already built in, and literally in 2 sessions, very deep kind of painful acknowledgement of like just certain patterns that I was just, I mean, it's so obvious after the fact, but I was just so, and you've pointed out my kind of like ability to kind of maybe float past some of these deeper, more difficult feelings. But like she was able to kind of just like rip off the Band-Aid and say like, this is what's happening. And, and I was like, oh shit, of course.
Which a good friend can do too, and I think that therapy is good for people that maybe are in need of more bandwidth, because the danger with friends is that you sort of become like, they become emotional dumping grounds for you.
Right.
But I don't know. I really, my best friend is in therapy. and it's sort of a new addition to their life. And I've been reflecting in the last few weeks specifically that while they're over there in talk therapy, learning and uncovering and putting words to things that, they've really been repressing for a long time, I feel like I'm doing a very similar thing in Kink and in my relationship with you, but in like a so much more fun way. Not to like put them, one is neither better than the other, but it's just been funny for me to put those things alongside and be like, I actually think we're doing the same work. Like, I'm reflecting on my childhood and reflecting on growing up, and also because I'm writing about it, right? So I have this other layer of analysis that's going on in the last few months where I am trying to use it as material for my work. And so there's this meta layer of like, I'm experiencing it, I'm relating it to what's going on inside, and then I'm trying to put it to paper, which always the work stares back at you in a really different way. And
absolutely. No, and I've always tried to kind of blur the lines between, again, in a careful way, but blur the lines between work and play and love and sex and friendship and politics and philosophy and creativity. And I think that we're doing that in a really complex, fascinating process. And I'm really enjoying it. And it's not easy. Like, no. I definitely don't. I mean, I think that, one thing that we haven't talked about, and I've talked about polyamory a little bit in this, on this podcast, but it's different, obviously, it depending on the kind of depth of the relationships that you're in. It's in a certain way easy when, if you have a series of kind of lighter, more lighthearted commitments, and you're engaged more playfully with people, and there's a beauty to that. And I like having chapters of my life where I feel more like I'm a solo, agent, going, kind of very much at the whim of my own, like, desires and perceived, like, directions that are necessary at that moment. Then, of course, as soon as you go deeper with somebody, and, that's happened to me. I don't know, I'm 46. I've probably had 5 relationships that I consider, partnerships in the sense that you're like going on a journey with somebody, and that your decisions aren't only your own anymore, but they like involve and incorporate another human that you've like decided to go on a deeper journey with. So I think that when you do polyamory with that as the backdrop, it presents challenges that obviously aren't there when you're not. And like your insecurities are laid bare, and you have to face them, and you're on the one hand you're more confident because you're like, okay, this person's here for the long haul.
Right.
On the other hand, it's more raw and more vulnerable. And so there's more at stake. That's exactly what it is.
Well, something that I've been thinking about is, because we're doing polyamory and kink at the same time, which is not always true, people might think they go hand in hand, but we know many people in polyamorous relationships that aren't like in a sort of developed DS dynamic, for example. That I think it's interesting that like our polyamorous relationship is so open. Like, we don't really have many rules, not in the DS dynamic, but in the relationship dynamic. There aren't really any rules besides communication, right? Whereas other people will go through these like processes of like check-ins and like, you can do this, you can do that. Like there's much more like easing in. Whereas like we've always just been like, this is it, like we're doing this, there are no rules, let's just communicate. But that the DS dynamic like is a way for us to role play possession and being possessed.
Exactly. DS, for those who don't know, stands for dominance and submission.
Like 45 minutes in.
That's okay. I've only said it a couple of times.
No, for sure. But like that is especially me, like coming from a long-term relationship where for better or for worse, I did feel possessed. And that was really annoying and also comforting in some way. And that I find like the ability to role play these, like, I don't think we can deny that we like to possess and be possessed. Yeah. Like there's something comforting about that. There's something safe. And the ability to kind of do both is to like feel that way. Like I like feeling possessed by you while also enjoying being able to go and have other lovers.
Exactly. I mean, just so people are wondering about like the nuts and bolts of this, like, you know, it's this kind of ritualized thing where you ask me permission for things with full knowledge that permission will be granted, and that I'm not going to much more often than not.
Most of the time.
Well, we have to have some surprises here and there.
For sure. I like it. I like surprises.
But I'm just saying, like, if people are curious about how does this play out practically, I do think it's worth saying that there's this amazing ritualized kind of seeking of and giving of like control and permission, but it's done on a backdrop of both consent. Of us recognizing and also recognizing the beauty of freedom and of the intrinsic value of embracing having other lovers, for example. Like that's like, if we were both pointing to a place where like we knew that either one or both of us wanted monogamy and we're like doing this in the meantime, that would be terrible. It would be terrible.
Yeah.
But we found that we both like actually appreciate all the beauties of like knowing that our lovers are enjoying other experiences, that they're having needs met with other people, that we don't necessarily have to like be the person who meets all the needs. And yet there's another added like icing and on this cake, which is that then you get to feel included. And it's a ritualized really way of like including. And then so there's this thing of like, how does that communication unfold? And it's a beautiful again, it's a beautiful game that's not a game.
It's just a sacred game is what you say. Well, I think I was talking to some friends about kink last week, and neither of them are like kinky people, but my one friend said that they were in a relationship previously, and their ex-partner was like really into kink, and my friend like wasn't that into it, but was like happy to kind of play along and do that role to make their partner happy. And in that moment, I just sort of realized like what a divine moment we like entered into each other's lives, because we were both I think we align on so many things that we want, and as much as I want to explore kink, you also want to explore it, and as much as we want to explore polyamory, like we're just very aligned in all of those ways. And
that was also a process of figuring that out.
Totally.
That couldn't have just been done like any faster than it did.
No, totally.
I think that like getting to this place in our lives has taken getting to this place in our lives.
Totally.
Like,
but there's a real magic in that alignment, I think.
I'm 100% in agreement. And
I have a question for you.
Okay.
I think that I've spoken about my relationship to kink as a woman. And I know that you've had like more experience like in drinking my water.
She hates when I drink her water. This is the one place I assert dominance that she hates. I'm taking a sip of your water because I'm out of my water.
I just liked another episode on idiosyncrasies. What do you've been in more DS dynamics than I have.
I do think this is I okay, go ahead. I'm gonna let you.
Well, yeah, I think. Well, I guess maybe you could speak to what is different about our dynamic, the dynamic that we're co-creating right now, but also, you know, from a more intellectual or philosophical perspective, sociological perspective, like what has engaging in DS as a dom like taught you about your relationship to masculinity?
Yeah, it's very much the other side of the coin of what you were talking about. Like, I am very much not a traditional man.
Mm-hmm.
Like, again, both the types of relationships I've sought out, the types of partners I've had, have been very much defined by a degree of freedom and independence that very few relationships are based on, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I take pride in that, you know. And again, it's like a happy accident that I happen to be attracted to this type of human. But there it is, like I am, and I'm not interested in a traditional nuclear family, gender dynamic. You know, I kind of went there with marriage a bit, but my marriage was so much based on someone so fiercely independent, and our genders were reversed in the sense that she made a lot more money than me. Mm. She was out there like doing her thing, and I was just in awe of it the entire time and never tried to put the brakes on it in any way. So that the traditional like man breadwinner with a woman at home cooking and cleaning and having kids, like I'm 46, I have no kids, like I don't fit into that role, and I don't want to. Mm-hmm. I'm much more interested in like rethinking how, if I do have kids, I'm more interested in doing it in a more tribal setting, in a kind of you know, my happiest memories of childhood are not from like the nuclear family, which I found was like fraught with just deep problems of like just, I don't know. I mean, I just have these like, all my memories of my parents are much, much happier when they were apart. Like, I know they were very happy in the very beginning, but that was before I had a chance to remember. And then there was several years where they were fighting, and it was just like, it was just a dark moment, I think, in all of our lives a bit. And it's scarred us, like me and my brother, I think, deeply. And then my grandfather had this kind of more communal existence, my mother's father, who was younger than my father. And I have these wonderful memories of like being in community, of like people playing music and falling asleep like in the living room and not having a set bedtime, and having feeling that there's all these interesting people around that like I could take care of me. That felt safer to me than the mom and dad at home. And then when they split up, I was actually happy to have these separate lives and be able to go to Italy and spend time with my father and see his like wild, untamed life and the way he'd done that, and my mom moving around and exploring her ways with difficulties of being a single mom in her 20s with 2 little kids, and like but still it was like this adventure and this like a future that was unknown to a certain degree, which I've always really strived for in my life. I don't want to have like I'm not interested in choices that close off too much possibility. So all this to say that my relationship to masculinity, I've also just, I don't feel like my personality is traditionally very masculine. Like, I think like, I don't know. I just think I'm in touch with my feminine side, in quote unquote feminine side. I think that obviously all these things are being reinterpreted in a wonderful way. I'm very
I think we can still,
there's archetypes, let's say.
I think that masculine and feminine is different than male and female. And I think that like even in like a non-binary context, like there's still the acknowledgement of those poles, yin and yang, right?
Yeah.
Like I think there is something very essential about the masculine and the feminine energies, and so I think it's a great way. Like I have very masculine energy in some ways, you know.
But to finish answering your question, like I like you. No, I say the opposite of you actually. I think that I am not so interested in the male archetype in the outside world. I'm much more interested in questioning that and reinterpreting it. I would like to go deeper into like questioning that, and like I'm freeing myself of the shackles of like traditional masculinity and stuff like that. I think that it's very limiting.
Yeah, totally.
And so again, like, and then like you, I think it's both fun and cathartic and sexy to kind of like take on this more traditional role in this kind of ritualized theatrical way. That does reflect a deep truth of what's in me. That's why I asked, is it innate? Because there is a certain innateness to it, but with the caveat that obviously that what feels innate is built on our contingent like experiences of childhood and the contingencies of our culture and the way it happened to unfold, and it could have unfolded a million other ways. But for whatever it is, it's healthy and fun and complicated in a fascinating way to like dive into that role and be this more obviously masculine manifestation of me, let's say.
Has it been surprising?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Say more.
Well, again, like with I don't want to get into TMI, but no, I think that there's I think that we both are really enjoying, and you've pushed me farther than I've ever been pushed before, like expressing a certain like pleasure and pain in like really pushing the limits there in terms of like roughness, for lack of a better word, violence. I think that again, it's like this really safe container to explore these like really like really primitive, how they coming across as primitive or being experienced as primitive urges, let's say.
Does it scare you?
It hasn't scared me. It's just surprised, maybe is the more of the word. Yeah. Because I'm such a pacifist. Like deep down. I'm so avoid conflict at all costs. I'm always being the middle brother also, like has always made me like just like really tuned into like always trying to see both, you accuse me of this politically too sometimes, and with like I debates with Aaron like always like both sidesism, but it's really like a genuine like empathy for any other perspective than my own. Like I genuinely think like, well, if this person reached this place, there must be some truth to it, and like always wanting to kind of meet them halfway. And then in our dynamic, it's like the opposite. There's no compromise. There's no like, there's like this kind of like my way or the highway type thing, which is like, again, let's be explicit here. This is like deeply consensual. There's always way to like exit at any moment. But there's this like inhabiting of these, like, again, it's these opposites of what we manifest in our day-to-day interactions. And obviously there's a need to have that outlet, and maybe for everyone, but definitely for us,
Yeah. I think definitely for us, And maybe for many other people, and they just don't know it.
Yeah.
But I do think that we've found ourselves in a very particular moment in each other's lives that allows us to, I think, play in this space with like so much care and so much communication and so much love that you know, I wouldn't tell anyone to just start playing in these murky waters without really making sure that the person that you're doing with is holding you with care and with love.
You've used the word murky waters a few times, and I actually disagree with the metaphor. I would think of it more as very clear waters, but with a lot of like hazards. So they're like when I think of the waters that we're sailing through, I see them pristine and beautiful and sparkling, but with like jagged rocks everywhere, and like dangers and currents. And there's like a real flow of the water. Murky water seems still to me.
Yeah.
And it seems like it doesn't like allow you to see anything, whereas I see a lot. So I'm thinking, and I see deep. So I think that there's like, I see if we were going to like use the water like metaphor, the symbology of it, I see, you know, rapids. I see lots of motion. I see lots of clarity. I see lots of danger, and I see lots of fun. So like none of those are present in the image of murky water for me.
Yeah.
But again, maybe it's just an aesthetic predisposition.
I don't know. I think that I'm arriving. I think maybe it goes up and down. Like there have been some moments where it's felt very murky to me, and not in a way that is dangerous, but in a way where I'm like, whoa, we're blurring so many boundaries that I don't know what the container is anymore, especially with work and with friends who are also lovers, who are also friends.
Right.
Like and working together and then making art about us working together and playing together. Like there have been moments where it's felt a little murky, and maybe it's just
They're just from kicking up the sand.
Yeah. Because I agree with you, there's a lot of clarity.
Yeah, we've kicked up a lot of sand.
And I mean, I think we've just so gracefully moved through the obstacles that have been presented before us that in this moment, like even being able to sit here and talk to you about this in a relatively public arena, like is only by virtue of the grace that we've moved through all of these obstacles or kicking up the sand or whatever.
Yeah.
And that like, it's been a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I've loved every single moment of it. And we've only grown deeper.
Yeah.
Which is astounding.
Let this be the first of many conversations. But I think this is probably a good place to wrap this one up.
Yeah. Feels good.
Thank you, Dulcinee. And I'm sorry it took me so long to figure out.
It's okay.
I'm not really sorry.
Daddy's always right. Are you going to cut that?
Nope. I take it back. You're not allowed to edit any of this. And we're releasing it exactly as it is.
Okay, well,
and we're releasing it today.
I'll say as a today. Oh my God. I'll say like before you cut it off, I'm sure that I have deeper and more articulate things to say about feminism. Like I'm like doubling back on that. So maybe
No. You said a lot of great things, and
that's like such a big question, and so I just want to disclaim that I certainly have more things to say about feminism and
Marxism. I want to hear more about
Marxism,
and I want to talk about more about our work in Bombay Beach. So let's make the next conversation more explicitly political.
That's great.
And this will just be part 1 of 2.
Good. I'll think about it a little bit more. Okay.
Thank you, Dulcinee. I love you.
Love you.